Morning, folks. Interesting piece of data just sent to me this morning. Posse Comitatus. This is how great this old England was, and is, if we can remember what England is and what the UK isn't. Okay, the UK is a corporation, England is a nation. So, the Posse Comitatus, from the Latin for power of the country. Okay, so the country, not of the corporate shits, yeah? The Johnny-come-latelys, like the Boris the Blonde Bombshell, or the Labour Massive. These are a political class on their own, working together. You know, this idea, if you're still operating on, one side's better than the other. It doesn't matter if Boris resigns tomorrow, you'll get a bigger shit in. You've got to start to understand that these politicos are their own operation, and they are against you, the population. So it says, Posse Comitatus, from the Latin for power of the country in common law. Okay, that's land law, not UK policy. It's a group of people mobilised by the conservator of peace. Now, typically it says a sheriff. Now, the sheriffs and the whole sheriff system became ceremonial, I think, in 2006. So it has no teeth in relation to the corporate side of things. So we couldn't use their appointed sheriffs to operate this, because you'd just be operating under the UK. So we would have to, the militia mindset, as I've said, I've been putting this out now for quite a number of years. You need to get in your mind this idea of militia, that you are sanctioned to operate in the service of law. That is, of course, the common law, not the UK law, which is contract law. This is the law of the land, or the common law of England. So a conservator of peace is then anybody who understands the common law, understands that we are all duty bound to service the law, not policy, the law. Then it says typically a sheriff, forget that. We would have to allocate our own sheriff. So the conservator of peace, it says typically a sheriff, is to suppress lawlessness or defend the county. So at the moment, people are not seeing the distinction between you, the population, and this Bolshevik force operating through the UK corporation. So the government, the crown, the unincorporated crown that runs the corporate crown, which is the inner city, not the monarchical. And we've discussed that the intent is to, once the Queen goes, this next critter, which is completely controlled by the Rothschilds, Evelyn de Rothschild specifically, will be in full command of the next monarch, as they are with the current. But this is where it gets interesting, is whereas the coronation oath is sworn on the Bible to uphold God's law, this next coronation will not be using the Bible to swear this oath. People have to be aware of this, and we have to keep this at the back of our minds, because we have to insist that that is not the case when the Queen is finally removed from the public. So it's a conservator of peace. That's who mobilises Posse Comitatus. Typically the sheriff, but of course we can't use those today because they're all sucked into Freemasonry, which is moving the Noahide laws, or the 7 laws of Noah, as opposed to the biblical law, the 10 Commandments. So they're replacing the 10 Commandments with the 7 laws of Noah. That's basically what they are trying to do, and actually doing quite a good job. It says the Posse Comitatus originated in 9th century England, so that's 800s. That's King Alfred time. Okay, so this is before before your 1066. It's also before all the crusade nonsense, etc. This is England as England was formed under the auspices of King Alfred. So Posse Comitatus originated in 9th century England, simultaneous with the creation of the office of sheriff. So Alfred created the sheriffs in order they could control the local militias, which is the population who can be rallied together to protect the county. And of course today all counties in England are under a serious threat from this medical establishment, what was Public Health England, but now is Public Health Security. So can you understand why they've changed that from Public Health England to Security? Is because now that they've got all the brain dead that have took the shot, they're now going to claim we have a duty to protect, to secure those who have obeyed and bent over and joined the ranks of the First World War pals to be annihilated. Okay, so that's pretty much what they've done. It says, though generally obsolete throughout the world, well, it is only because we're now living under the corporate system. But this system as it is actually still exists as England. That is the problem. The majority of the population think they are British. No, you're English. Okay, the British Isles, yes, you could class yourselves as Britons, but the term British, in the sense as it's used since the 1066 invasion, does not represent what it is you believe it represents. And therefore, we have to recognise that the duty is upon us, the public, the population, men, okay, man, male and female, to remember England and to utilise and re-establish its offices. So sheriff would be one. We will class that as the head of the militia in your local area, your shire as it was. It says, though generally obsolete throughout the world, it remains theoretically and sometimes practically part of the United States legal system. So the United States are still have it in place, which they do. And of course, they've shifted that into National Guard under the corporate. And here you've got your territorial armies. So there's still a distinction. You've got to start to recognise this, because they're going to use what you believe to be correct, but obviously they're going to be bringing in the corporate and the militaries. Now, if we want a bit of an insight into what's actually going on, we need look no further than Australia currently. So I don't think it's a secret now that the Australian Northern Territory in Kimberley have moved to surround the Aboriginal population and are forced vaccinating. They're forced vaccinating them and moving them into quarantine camps. So they've been building these temporary quarantine camps in Australia now for quite a couple of months. Here in Blighty, they're building huge prisons. Okay, they're not ready yet, but you're talking prisons that are going to hold 19 up to 30,000 people. Okay, so you can see where this is going. Now, they keep setting off this pretend terror nonsense in order they can up the terror levels and start to occupy the borders between the shires, using the excuse that they are we're on a high terror alert. But what they're actually doing, and they've been doing this for 20 years, is slowly but surely putting in your minds that the borders are something now that have to be recreated and looked at as a form of wall, that while on England, if you want to traverse from one shire to another, they've got it in your mind that that's a demarcation point, so that they can then issue fines, etc., if they claim lockdown and say you can't go out your border, etc. We've discussed that they're moving that into the avatar system called geofencing, where the borders don't necessarily have to be the physical borders, but the borders as set through this avatar dream world, if you will. So, over in Australia, it says, spoke with brother who spoke directly with family. Up to 240 people in Robertson River were pressured into getting injected. 60 people were hit in Banjari Rockhall was it yesterday, and they're heading for Borroloola this week. The military police and task force worry Aboriginal health. People who fled the community or travelled for food have been fined $5,000. This is a war crime, martial law, and criminal. Okay? We need help. Our people are under attack. This is serious and it's a crime against humanity. We need to invoke international humanitarian law immediately. So this is in the Northern Territory of Australia, where the majority of the Aboriginal populations are. I mean, they're all over the country, but the biggest amount of them have sort of been forced there. Now, we get something here from military. A guy called Christopher Guilfoyle, and he says, I have some pretty bad news. A friend of mine who is on leave from army said they're a bit broken. This is the military boys themselves. They were part of a large deployment up far north to surround an Aboriginal community. They said multiple units were ordered to surround Aboriginal village to stop any escaping. They said a lot of colleagues were disgusted as they had to watch the Indigenous being forced down and held and jabbed by the medical military. A cell in all militaries, specifically medical. So then the military police and the soldiers have to sit back and guard these fruit bats as they come in and force vaccinate people. He said a lot of colleagues were disgusted as they had to watch the Indigenous being forced down and held and jabbed by the medical military. A lot of them were disgusted at the orders given to them. I asked, why didn't you stand down? Military are supposed to protect the people, not harm them against their will. This is treason. So fucking angry. This person is suffering PTSD on leave from it. They have been warned that if they disobey, ramifications will be implemented. Some military are breaking down. I was so absolutely angry. I asked, why are you disclosing this? They said because they are going to start with Indigenous first and it will be covered up and silenced. I said that they and those commanders are, he uses the C word, above them are committing treason. So they're basically laying siege against the command level, which I've discussed many times in relation to the British military. It's all about preventing you from understanding your capacity as an English soldier so that you will follow the British Army command level. So here they're clearly saying in Australia, the soldiers, the rank and file, are blaming the command level. It says, at first I thought they were taking the piss out of me, but they weren't. They confided because it's messing with some of their heads. So some of the soldiers are really not happy with this. This is good, because what needs to happen is the soldiers, you arrest your commanding officer and you put them in, you put them in a prison for that moment. And you have to do this with all your commanding officers, because they're the ones that are Masonic. They're the ones that are taking their orders not from nation, but from the lodges. Okay? And in the last live stream we did on Sabotage Sevi, we sort of could see how these commanders through the lodges are in the main people that will class themselves as Jewish. But of course, as we explained, this is an inversion of the Jewish system and the protocols of doing sin in order to bring about the Messianic age. They confided because it's messing with some of their heads. Some are on leave as they rotate for stress. Absolutely effing disgusted. It's treason. They can get themselves in a lot of trouble now for telling me this. I'm sick to the stomach if they are doing this to Indigenous by force. What the F are they going to do with suburbians? I'm very deeply disturbed and stressed out. Etymology. And this is back to Posse Comitatus. It says, the term derives from the Latin Posse Comitatus, force of the country. In English use from the late 16th century, shortened to posse from the mid 17th century. While the original meaning refers to a group of citizens assembled by the authorities, you see, this is where we have to use our own understanding of this. The authorities as they stand today is the corporate, the problem, the lodges, the Masonic Roman Empire under this Sabbatai Talmudic system. So we have to re-understand the common authorities, okay? The authorities in this respect would be the leaders of the militia, who we could class as sheriffs if we so chose. It says the two most common authorities used were the Militia Ordinance. So the Militia Ordinance. And the militia, again, like I said, that is the citizen. It's not the command level. Now, in the Militia Ordinance back in the 16th century, they were on the side of the parliamentarians, and that of the king were the old-fashioned commissions of array. So there's divisions in that, but we don't have to get into that. What you have to understand is that the militia is on us, the population, because we are what is under threat. Our systems of our shire, our everything in our shires are under threat from this corporate system. It says, but the royalist leader in Cornwall, Sir Ralph Hapton, indicted the enemy before the grand jury of the county as disturbers of the peace, and had a Posse Comitatus called out to expel them. So, disturbers of the peace, anything that's going on that's classed as a disturbance of the peace, activates our right to call our own grand jury, class them as disturbers, and then we organise Posse Comitatus to expel them. To expel them means we would arrest them and incarcerate them by our own means. It says, in law, the powers of sheriffs in England and Wales for Posse Comitatus were codified by Section 8 of the Sheriffs Act 1887, the first subsection of which stated that every person in a county shall be ready and apparelled at the command of the sheriff. As I've said again, we have the actual sheriff system that we have was turned into just a nonsense in around 2006. Yeah, so it's just for show. So that's not the system now would be calling on, which goes up to the Lord Lieutenants, etc. They're not doing the job because they're ceremonial, but they still exist because the corporate side of things is operating through it and claiming it to be correct. It's not. It says the permitted every person in the county shall be ready and apparelled in command of the sheriff, and at the cry of the county to arrest a felon. So yeah, you'd have to set the militia, its own command structure, deciding who are the felons. All right. Whether within a franchise or without. So we don't need a franchise of the Crown to do this. This is what England tells you is your duty to do. So there's nothing nonsensical about this. This is what England dictates to Englishmen. All right, not via the corporate government, because that is the problem. They're the one exercising all the protocols coming out of the United Nations for the sunshine and rain change system that they're implementing, as well as the medical nonsense that they're also shoving. And as we've just seen, we can see what Australia's doing. That's the plan for everywhere. They're obviously testing it in the areas where they think they can get least resistance. And of course, Australia, being almost the size of the United States, only has about 26 million people. You know, and the distances between them are so huge, it's very easy. It's the same in Canada. It's very easy to do this in Canada because the landmass is vast, but the people are not many, and they're all way apart from each other, as it were. Here in England, it's a bit different. Our shires border on each other, and there's people everywhere. You know, I think what we need to start to recognise that whereas they've created this multicultural system to serve them, that it's only really the immigrants that are naturally going to serve them because they're happy to come here and they're going to do what they're told. However, multicultural as we are in England, and, you know, it's been so for a long time, we have to ensure that works against them by coming together on the basis that we don't want to be told what we have to put into our bodies, regardless of what talking heads are spewing the bile that we must do so. I mean, you have to reckon with yourself now. If you've not took this nonsense, it's because you know, as an intuitive knowing, that it's garbage. Do not be persuaded any other way. I mean, you're looking at it that way, then the foolhardy, the useless, they're the ones that have gone for this. So they're now the citizen operating with this Bolshevik system that's hell-bent on annihilating everybody. So it's a duty then, once created, to work out who the disturbers of the peace are and expel them. That's England talking. In law, the powers of the sheriffs in England and Wales, Posse Comitatus, well, we have to understand that the system that they call sheriffs today is just ceremonial. It has no teeth. We would have to reform that as a population, okay? The militia should be formed. It should be people who understand the situation and the position, and that they want to do that, They understand that England sanctions it, and that they see and take on that duty as sanctioned by English common law. So basically that's just going through sort of what can happen. It's about disturbers of the well, something or somebody's labelled as a disturber of the peace. That's enough then to activate Posse Comitatus. So I'll put a link to it, and I'll also put some images of the Australian issues that are going on now, because we have to start to recognise, slowly but surely, as the boiling frog game works, what you're seeing in Australia is a test. They're testing to see what resistance they get. And of course, being bullies and cowards, this command level has to pick the weakest first. And obviously in Australia, it's the Aboriginal. Okay. We have to also consider that a lot of the Muslim communities are not going to be vaxxed. If we're not careful, as they raise up this terror level nonsense and put it into your mind that you're under terror again, they could begin in those communities. And of course, racism is rife everywhere. Earned. we have to stop pretending that these immigrants that have come in here have been an absolute light of loveliness. They're not. So the idea of racism hasn't actually been, it's been helped and placated by the immigrants themselves in the way that they rob the system. So the Crown would like to reinforce the division. It wants to raise the idea of a terror threat from all that you would consider not native to England. And of course, the majority of people that they know they're going to have on side is the mindset of the people that have gone along and took this shot and joined into this system. So they're the people they're depending on in order to succeed in this sort of slowly move this power in so they can force this shot as they are doing in Australia. So that's just a brief and another sort of angle onto why you should start to consider and allow into your mind the idea of militia. However, that this idea of militia is completely and utterly outside the corporate system, which is the system pushing this Bolshevik maneuver in order to remove great swathes of Western civilization. So there you go, people. I will say with that, till the next time.